What's up, everybody? We are back. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. So, we're going to be getting back to this Lauren Hall stuff, but as you can tell, I'm dragging my feet getting back to it. Why? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because I got a 150-page interview with Harold Weisberg and about 120 National Security Index archive files. So, and are we going to learn anything new in all this stuff? Well, of course. Of course we are. But not that much, right? This is where the research starts to get tedious, right? As you gain a greater understanding of things and you dig into these documents, you start to realize that instead of going through 10 pages to get a piece of information, you'll have to go through 100 pages to get a piece of information, right? And a lot of duplication. We're going to have a lot of duplication in that stuff. But, so yeah, so it's, I'll be honest with you, it's going to be tedious, even for fucking me, and I live for this stuff. So if it's going to be tedious for me, it's going to be tedious for fucking you. But then you'd think that I would just change and make it not so tedious. Nah, if I got to suffer through it, so do you. But today we're gonna veer off just a little bit. We're going to talk about Sergio Arcacha today. I mentioned him a lot, and we never really talk about him. I don't think I've ever done a background on him, even in any of my longer presentations. So off the top of my head, Sergio Arcacha was a Cuban diplomat under Batista. And like everyone else, was pro-Castro until Castro betrayed everyone, or until everyone started to get wind that he was going to betray everyone. Some of the more interesting things that we'll find as we go through the Sergio Arcacha stuff is that he went to Colombia. A lot of people went to Colombia of significance. Dmitry de Mohrenschildt went to Colombia at the same time Sergio Arcacha went there. So, and as you'll see as we get to the Jim Garrison Sergio Arcacha file, there's a small section on Dmitry de Mohrenschildt. Why it's in there, I don't know. There's no relation that I can tell. And there was also another file that I can't find. There's another Sergio Arcacha file that's all Winterland stuff. I couldn't find that one. I'll dig that up another time. But this we're going to spend not too much time. We'll spend a couple days. I feel bad giving you like a preview of somebody for a couple days and not giving you all the stuff. We're going to do it. We should do it all the way, right? But this is just really to break up the monotony of dealing with the Lauren Hall stuff. Ugh, God, I'll be honest. I'm just dreading it. I might put it off a little bit longer if I can find some interesting topics to talk about. Now, I just need to point out a couple things. This show has barely ever talked about fucking Jack Ruby. Okay, barely ever talked about Oswald in as far as his alleged activities in New Orleans, right? We haven't done any dedicated shows on Oswald, really. We've done a couple timelines and stuff, nothing major, right? We haven't done shit on George de Mohrenschildt, haven't done anything on the Paynes, haven't done anything on Max Gold or J. Walton Moore or any of these people who are like in the background surrounding Oswald when he gets to Dallas. We literally have years and years and years of fucking content. Daily content. God damn it. Don't call me when I'm doing a show. Okay? You better have some psychic powers and know I'm doing a show and not call. Okay? And I'm sticking to that. So, Arcacha's an interesting guy. He's obviously traced to Dallas via the Rose Cherami incident. I write all about the Rose Cherami incident in detail in my book, A Warning from History, available on Amazon. But if it wasn't for the Rose Cherami incident, we would have very little linking Arcacha to the assassination. He was running in those circles. He was running in those Cuban groups, working out of 544 Camp Street, associating with Guy Bannister. He was extremely close to David Ferry, which I find a little strange because David Ferry is a weirdo, bisexual, pedophile, freak bitch with painted on eyebrows, right? And Arcacha is this Cuban ultra-conservative right-winger who should have been, for all intents and purposes, disgusted with someone like David Ferry, right? Arcacha was not a fucking homo. I don't see any of these Cuban dudes getting involved with any of that shit. That's some weird, as X-Cube would say, some white shenanigans. But it's a weird intersection, isn't it? It's a weird intersection of ultra right-wing military kind of lifestyle mixed with blatant, overt, flaming homosexuality and pedophilia. Fucking just, there could not be two more polar world fucking views that seem to be intermeshed, right? And so I think that's why I feel like Lawrence Howard and the mercenaries and Hemming and these guys who all knew Ferry still kept him at like arm's distance, right? It would seem as though this trio of mercenaries in New Orleans was there not because they wanted to associate with Ferry, but they were obviously recruited into the assassination plot. And the question is, were they put there by an external force, or was it Ferry who pulled them in? Ferry is the obvious in, but who did Jerry Hemming say called Ferry? Was that Richard Davis? Or was it Howard K. Davis? Might have been Howard K. Davis, the pilot. And so I'm going to have to verify that. I'm going to have to, I'm stringing together a web in my mind here. Hemming and his associations with the assassination, I still think, are kind of on the outskirts. He wasn't an idiot. I felt that Hemming felt any involvement in an assassination plot was guaranteed to end you up in jail forever or killed. Hemming had a lot of connections, and he was a real smart guy. He was pragmatic. That I'll say about Hemming for sure. He was definitely pragmatic. I would kind of say the same thing about Howard and Hall and Seymour, but it seems as though their being brought into the assassination had to have been over principle. There's no amount of money you could have given these guys that would have swayed their opinion. Maybe except for Hall. Hall seems like he was that kind of scumbag who would have done certain things for money. But these guys, I think, were ideologically driven. That's why they were involved. And Seymour obviously involved because of his close appearance to Lee Harvey Oswald. So my train of thought is, how do we determine who brought these guys into the plot? And thinking of that, we should look at people like Howard K. Davis and his connection to David Ferry. And perhaps David Ferry used Davis as a in to those mercenary guys. In which case, we have the incidents at Bolton Ford in January of 61, which means we'd have to roll back the clock before that. So you're looking at sometime in 1960. Long before there's an assassination plot, these guys had become connected to Ferry. But why? Anti-Castro activities? Yes, and you definitely up to the Bay of Pigs, but after the Bay of Pigs, no. So I don't think we're going to be able to iron out the dates of those relationships prior to Bolton Ford. There's just nothing out there. No indications of these guys' activities in 1960 like this, especially in New Orleans. And we have other loose ends. We have loose ends like William Seymour's alleged association with the Double Check Corporation in New Orleans. We have zero information on that. And the only place you're going to see that is on WikiSpooks. So, God, there's got to be so much more out there on William Seymour. There has to be. Because there's virtually nothing. With these interviews with Howard and Hall, we can pretty much iron out what these guys were doing. I have a very solid grip on who these guys really were, what they were really doing at these times. And they were just trying to make a living, right? They were just trying to make a living doing something that they knew. And were they passionate about the Cubans? If they were passionate about the Cubans, everybody wouldn't have been stealing the fucking money, right? They would have sent the weapons to the Cubans instead of sending them to Inter-Armco for the fucking Israelis, right? Hard to say what was really going on then. But I think I've rambled. Well, I've just rambled for like 10 fucking minutes. So let me get back to the point here. Sergio Arcacha. I got a resume here. April 1968. Says Sergio V. Arcacha. His other last name, second last name is Smith. Sergio Arcacha Smith is how he's more commonly known. Address 9915 Donegal Drive, Dallas, Texas. So this is a resume. Obviously, he was looking for a job. Objective: sales, marketing, and management work in the international field with a large corporation which can offer a wider range of advancement and more challenging programs. Will prefer with base in Spain, Venezuela, Mexico, or Argentina. Skills: international marketing, distribution, international advertising, planning, and coordinate sales and licensing. Successful experience calling on men at all levels of responsibility in practically all kinds of business and industry, with particular emphasis on top management and government. Foreign language: fluent in Spanish and English. Good knowledge of Portuguese and Italian. Oral understanding of French and Urdu, which is Pakistani and Indian. Personal: age 45, height 5'7", weight 185. 5'7", that's awful fucking short. That is awful short. All of the pictures of him make him appear to be at least 5'10", 5'11". There's no fucking way he was 5'7", 185. He's well over 200 pounds. Married, 5 children, health excellent, birthplace Cuba, high IQ, good business, social, financial, and personal references. Product experience: have handled all types of general merchandise. Education: high school, Colegio La Salle, Vedado, Cuba. College, Colegio Belen, Jesuits, Habana, Cuba. International law, University of Havana, he spells it with a B, University of Habana, Cuba. And international law, he studied at Columbia University in New York. So he's a very well-educated guy. Experience: 1967 to present. Vanguard Products, Inc., manager of international department, reports directly to president and owner of company. Responsibilities include coordination of operations between international depart and other departments of the company, coordination of the relations of company with its overseas distributors, supervision of international marketing and licensing programs of company, being responsible for direct negotiation of all licensing contracts, direct their efforts towards placing orders, quotations, and correspondence with distributors and customers overseas. During this period, traveled extensively throughout Canada, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Philippines, Australia, Mexico, Western Europe. For reference, contact Mr. J. Wagnon, president and owner, 5307 Maple, Dallas, Texas. 1964 to 67. Looks like Frigiking Company, Dallas, a division of Cummins Engine Company, Inc. of Columbia, Indiana. The nation's leading independent producer of automobile air conditioners, also manufacturers of truck air conditioning and refrigeration units. As international manager, directly responsible for developing their international department, worked primarily on worldwide long-range marketing forecasts, budgets, economic research for future licensing agreements, assisted in joint venture negotiations for assembly and manufacturing operations, recommended and implement marketing policies, and promote sales of companies' products from $380,000 to $5 million. The year I left, reported directly to president or vice president. Then here he has references. Summary: experience continued. Development and engineering with an offer to make a similar company in Barcelona, Spain. Mr. Kirkpatrick died 2 months after, and the project fell. 62 to 63, Climatic Air Conditioning, Inc., Dallas, manufacturers of auto air conditioners, developed their international department. So he allegedly, was he working? See, this is an interesting one because you have an overlap in time. It says 1962 to 63, Hotel America, Houston, as assistant manager. Letter enclosed with references, but that seems to have an overlap, 62 and 63, with Climatic Air, Inc. How can you be doing both in 2 different cities? 61, with the Cuban Democratic Front, government of Cuba in exile, as a delegate in New Orleans, Louisiana. 59, representing the following companies in Venezuela: Paul Gallen, World Military Supply; Arcacha Company, Global Trading from New York. With the above, I've done more than $1 million business a year. I also had my factory name Manufacturas Cubagua in Caracas. 57 to 59, Director de Medios of Corpa, Walter Thompson in Venezuela, where I handled the advertising for such companies as Ford Motor Company, Gillette Razor, Parker Pen, Kodak, Pons, etc. Also used to handle the TV shows for these companies. 55 to 57, Consul for Cuba in Caracas, Venezuela. 52 to 55, Consul for Cuba in Bombay, India. 50 to 52, Consul for Cuba in Rome, Italy. 48 to 50, Consul for Cuba in Madrid, Spain. So his real government work lasted from 48 to 57 in Cuba. So about 10 years he was a diplomat, an international diplomat under Batista. My most marketable asset is my good connection in government and my industry all over the world, and of course my very intimate knowledge of international business methods. I can furnish names of persons whom can refer to my ability. So that's a little background on Mr. Arcacha. Doesn't mention he killed the president in there anywhere. So let's take a look at this is from Jim Garrison's files. This is his Sergio Arcacha file. He does go off on some tangents in here, goes on some off subjects. Depending on how long they are, we'll cover them. But let's get started. James L. Alcock. Subject: Gordon Novell and one Sergio Arcacha Smith, each between the 1st day of August 61 and the 31st of August 61, did willfully and unlawfully conspire with David W. Ferry, herein named but not charged, and others not herein named, to commit simple burglary of a munitions bunker located in Houma, Louisiana, in order to obtain explosives and other forms of munitions belonging to the Schlumberger Well Services, a corporation authorized to do business in the state of Louisiana. So Jim Garrison charged these guys with the burglary to the Houma Depot because they stole a bunch of arms and ammunition and stuff. And so, according to Gordon Novell, the CIA left the door open, right? This was an inside job. Hey, go clean out these weapons. And Schlumberger's a partner with the CIA, is confirmed by the CIA going back to the mid-1950s and continuing on indefinitely. Schlumberger having been run by Jean de Menil. And so the burglary took place. They stole all the arms. According to Novell, the arms never made it to the Cubans. It was sold off to Inter Armco, which was technically a proxy for Samuel Cummings and his Adams Consolidated, right? So those weapons never made it to the Cubans. Those weapons ended up going to Inter Armco and then to Israel to fight the Palestinians. Okay, that's part of the story that most fucking Kennedy dipshits like to overlook. Memorandum, 14th of February, 1967, to Jim Garrison from William Gurvich, investigator, subject, Sergio Arcacha, current residence. In my report of 6 February 67, I noted that the former neighbors of Sergio Arcacha at 10746 Lake Gardens, Dallas, Texas, were very reluctant and curious as to why I wanted to locate him. It was only after a convincing reason that Mrs. Roberts, Barbara Young, gave me his new address. Mrs. Crawford was equally curious. Both gave the impression they were protecting him. It is my opinion that one or both of these women have since told Arcacha of my visit. Recalling his obvious intensive interest in Loisel and me near his residence, 9915 Donegal Drive in Dallas, Texas, coupled with the subsequent news from his former neighbors, Arcacha may well be aware he has been located and is the subject of an investigation. he might regard us as some of the revolutionaries who have good reason to look for him regarding funds he formerly handled in New Orleans. Or he might have more accurately identified us as investigators. Therefore, I am offering the suggestion that some method of keeping tab on Arcacha be instituted. Should he move again, I would expect him to be even more difficult to locate. Continuation of the same memo. Sergio Arcacha, Personal Automobiles. Your attention is invited to my report of 6th February 1967. The following information is relative to the two automobiles seen and photographed in the drive at Arcacha's residence, 9915 Donegal Drive, Dallas, Texas. Texas 1966 KXZ 108, a 1962 Ford Thunderbird. Both of these vehicles were purchased in 66, so I'm assuming there's zero connection to the assassination on either one of them. All right, and so now we have this weird kind of offshoot into some files on the Des Moines Shields, which doesn't make any sense other than there's a couple things here. We're talking about Sergio Arcacha Smith, and we're talking about Dmitry Sergius von Mohrenschildt. So this might just be a misfiling because of the similarity of the names Sergio and Sergius. But also, there's also the connection here that both Dmitry Sergius it says von Mohrenschildt. See, the original Des Moines Shield was von Mohrenschildt. I don't know how it's pronounced, but it was spelled Skildt. So it was von Mohrenschildt. And that became Des Moines Shield. So I don't know why this is listed here like this. Demetrius Sergius von Mohrenschildt. That's like a hybridization of both names. Born 3/29/03 in Russia, attended school Petrograd, Russia. Served with Russian Imperial Black Sea Fleet 1916. Took part in White Counter-Revolutionary Movement in Russia 1916. Imprisoned in Russia 1916. Attended Yale, New Haven, Connecticut. Receiving a PhD. Received a degree, something. Background from Yale alumni. Records also set forth. Subject and relatives unknown to confidential informants having some knowledge of Communist Party activities in New Haven. So maybe it was George Des Moines Shield himself who went to Columbia. But either way, that's the only overlap that I see here, and so I'm really not inclined to read this stuff on the Des Moines Shields. The Des Moines Shields, Jesus Christ, I'm going to have to spend like 6 months on fucking George Des Moines Shield when I eventually get to him. So be prepared for that. All right, so skipping past all that stuff and back to Garrison's file on Arcacha. Here's a letter. It says, Mr. Jim Garrison, Dear Jim, it was so good to hear from you Saturday and to know that you're still interested in the assassination. I guess one never completely gets over the interest once it has bitten you. Oh, this is in 77, like 10 years after his initial investigation. Some of my documents are on microfilm, about 18 rolls that I need to have printed out. I'm sending CD 551 and one page from CD 533. Before Buck and I visit New Orleans, which I hope will be soon, I will try to have the microfilm printed out. She says before Buck and I, and I'm saying she, so, and it's Mary, yep, this is Mary Farrell and Buck Farrell. Remember, Buck Farrell was a longtime CIA agent involved with MK Ultra, and the CIA will not release any of his fucking documents. All right? He provided the fucking station wagon that the two people who are listed in the official motorcade documentation as having been Godfrey and McHugh and Reed in the back seat, right? That whole picture that's in the official motorcade stuff, which is totally bullshit. That vehicle was provided by Buck Farrell, okay? And two conspirators were using it. So go fuck yourself, Mary Farrell, okay? Anybody who used... The Mary Farrell archive is good. It's got a lot of stuff there. But number one, you got to fucking pay for it. It's behind a paywall. And it's goddamn definitely gate-kept by Mary Farrell, who... I don't want to hear shit. Her fucking husband... Her husband was a fucking CIA agent, and she wasn't. And she controls the JFK archive. Like, go fuck yourself to death, Mary Farrell. Fuck you. Okay? So, I don't ever use her archive. Just every once in a while, gets linked to something to her archive. But I use Weisberg's and Garrison's, which are Garrison's becoming kind of stale at this point. But I'm not going to spend any fucking money to get Mary Farrell's archive. You get like 5 or 6 documents a day, and then like you're gate kept until the next day. So, but no, fuck her to death. I'm sorry. This is the CIA gatekeeping their own shit. Pisses me the fuck off. So this is more shit. I'm just gonna skip over. I don't even give a fuck anymore about it. Trying to find more stuff on Arcacha. Okay, I'll read this because this is important and this definitely links. This is August 31st, 67 from to Mr. Edward Gurnis from C.J. Navarre, investigator at the District Attorney's Office. Dear Mr. Gurnis, this office is writing you in regard to confidential information that was received, which revealed that you may be in possession of certain facts concerning the investigation being conducted by this office into the conspiracy to assassinate the late President John F. Kennedy. Since we are not in receipt of any voluntary information from you, we are soliciting your cooperation in this matter mainly to determine if this confidential information is true and correct, and if so, to gain your complete confidence in assisting this office. The main points of this confidential information stated that you have knowledge about Clay Shaw as Clay Bertrand and also Lambert. Okay, I need you to listen to the words that are coming out of my mouth. This paragraph is of utmost importance. The main points of this confidential information stated that you have knowledge about Clay Shaw as Clay Bertrand and also Lambert. It further relates to Sanchez Diaz. Okay? I already know what they're talking about, what document they're talking about, and what situation and incident they're talking about. And this is in regards to the flights to Montreal. We feel that it is if these facts are true, you could greatly assist this office, blah, blah, blah. Please contact us. That's basically what this letter says. And then it appears as though we have a response. Response to C.J. Navarre. Dear sir, your letter arrived yesterday, however. I could not telephone you as they do not allow it here. I don't know what information you possess or how you acquired it, but I can say this. Yes, I knew both of them under various noms de plumes and at various places such as Hammond, Lake Charles, Oak Cliff, and Mexico. However, I do not care to discuss it through the mails. If you should be in Atlanta in the future and would come out here, I would talk to you. I remain sincerely, Edward Gurnis. All right, so obviously he's saying that he can't call him. He's talking about he's in an Angola prison. Okay, so he's trying to contact this guy in Angola prison because this guy knows the true identities of the men who flew to Montreal. As do I, as we will discuss here momentarily. I want to reread this again because this is important. I don't know what information you possess or how you acquired it, but I can say this. Yes, I knew both of them under various noms de plumes and at various places, such as Hammond, Lake Charles, Oak Cliff, and Mexico. Who is he talking about? He's talking about Clay Shaw using the alias of Clem Bertrand, but also Lambert. And he's talking about Sergio Arcacha, who also used the alias of Sanchez Diaz. But on the paperwork, it just says Diaz, and I always assumed that it was Herminio Diaz, because Herminio Diaz was definitely a fucking alias that was used and never an actual person involved in any of this stuff. He got killed in like 61 or something like that. So anybody who's thinking that Herminio Diaz has anything to do with anything is wrong. But I guess I was wrong as well, because I assumed that Arcacha was using Herminio Diaz in this one particular incident, but I guess he was using Sanchez Diaz. Unless these are all just bullshit names, and we're talking about the same fucking person. You never know. These goddamn Mexicans and shit have like 7 fucking names. So, but that definitely links if we can acknowledge that Clay Shaw was Lambert. Then we have the connection there to Sanchez, which is Sergio Arcacha. And who was it? It was Lambert, Diaz, and Heidel, which was Carrie Thornley, being flown up there by David Ferry. And where were they going? They were going to Montreal. And why were they going to Montreal? This is like another one of these key things that no one ever talks about. They were going to Montreal because they were meeting with, obviously, Louis Bloomfield of CMC, the CIA and Mossad's man up in Montreal, the Rothschilds' man in Montreal. All right, moving on. Memorandum, October 9th, 68, to Jim Garrison from Andrew J. Sciambra, reference Clay Shaw. During my recent interview with Mr. James J. Plain of Houston, Texas, Mr. Plain informed me that he had been contacted by a Mr. White of Freeport Sulphur in regards to a possible assassination plan for Fidel Castro. Mr. Plain said that Mr. White was only one of the many oil and import people that he had occasion to talk to from New Orleans regarding Castro. Mr. Plain also informed me that he thought that the picture of Clay Shaw was very familiar and that he may have met him in Houston, either at his apartment or at the Normandy Club, which the oil people of Texas frequent. A memo in the Guy Bannister file indicates that there is information which reports that Dick White, a high official of Freeport Sulphur, and Clay Shaw were flown to Cuba, probably taking off from the Harvey Canal area in a Freeport Sulphur plane piloted by David Ferry. The purpose of this trip was to set up import of Cuba's nickel ore to Canadian Front Corporation, which would in turn ship to the Braithwaite nickel plant. The plant was built by the U.S. government at a cost of about $1 million. All right, so let me just say this. Any time that I hear about a Canadian Front Corporation, all I think about is Permindex and Centro Mundial Comercial and their entire series of companies that they did nothing more than own stock in, who are primary holders of stock in a lot of companies. So when I hear about Canadian Front companies, that's what my mind instantly drifts to. The report is that the combine of Freeport Sulphur, White, and Shaw purchased the plant for $1 million and intended to get ore through a Canadian corporation they had formed. Yep, there it is. There is also a report that Guy Bannister hired Ferry and Jack Martin as investigators to check out the nickel plant deal. All right, memorandum, October 23rd, 1968. To Jim Garrison from Andrew Sciambra, reference Shaw, Ferry, and White, Freeport Sulphur. I contacted Mr. Plain by telephone in regard to Mr. White of Freeport Sulphur and David Ferry. Plain told me he distinctly remembers either Shaw or Ferry talking about some nickel mines which were located on the western tip of Cuba. He says he does not remember exactly the gist of the conversation, but he distinctly remembers that it was regarding these nickel mines. He said he cannot positively say that Ferry knew White or vice versa, but he somehow feels that they must have known each other. Alcock and I will call in Mr. White of Freeport Sulphur and ask him about our previous memorandum from Kimball, which mentions Shaw, Ferry, and White being together. My gut is that White's an alias. Statement by Justice Department spokesman Mr. Edward F. Wegman, a lawyer in New Orleans, wrote the Justice Department of May 4th, 24th, 67, requesting a public clarification of news stories concerning his client, Mr. Clay Shaw. He referred to an impromptu press interview of the Attorney General on March 2nd, 1967. This statement is in response to Mr. Wegman's request. The FBI investigation in New Orleans following the assassination of President Kennedy covered allegations by Dean A. Andrews, Jr., which included a reference to Clay Bertrand. Clay Bertrand was not identified as a real person. No evidence was found that Clay Shaw was ever called Clay Bertrand. The Attorney General's comment on March 2nd that Mr. Shaw was involved in the investigation was based on a briefing that morning. The Attorney General has since determined that it was erroneous. Nothing rose indicating a need to investigate Mr. Shaw. As the Attorney General stated in the interview, no connection between Mr. Shaw and the assassination was found through the investigation by the FBI. The Department of Justice is convinced that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone when he assassinated President Kennedy. Press interview with Ramsey Clark, March 2nd, 1967. Question: General Clark, you said 2 days ago, after your nomination was announced, that you would hope that District Attorney Garrison would turn over any information he has from his New Orleans probe. Has he turned over any information on the arrest of this latest gentleman? And Clark says, no, he's not. We haven't heard from District Attorney Garrison. I feel that, as I said the other day, if he really has any information or evidence, he has an obligation to bring it to the federal authorities who've been involved in the overall investigation. He is not at this date. I remain doubtful that he has anything. Has the Justice Department made any attempt to contact District Attorney Garrison about this? Clark says, we have not made any contact in view of his statements over the last week or so. Mr. Clark, do you have any information yourself about Clay Shaw? And he says he was involved in an FBI investigation in the New Orleans area in November, December 1963. We have the evidence that they're involved, and you can assume what the conclusions were from the Warren Commission report. And then he's asked, he was not mentioned in the Warren Commission's report, was he? He was not. So you don't believe he did have any connection with on the evidence that the FBI had, there was no connection found. You say that he was checked out and found clear, more or less. That's right. That's true. So that's a single page from that interview just to show that the FBI was indicating that he was involved in an actual investigation in November, December 63. That is not alleged to have happened. That didn't come out here until here in 1967. All right, next one. Next memo. Reference Shaw and Ferry contact. And 1977 open leads file. All right, so this was put into the 1977 open leads file. This is reference Griscom Morgan and the statement regarding Clay Shaw. Dear Mr. Bethel, for what it's worth, I'm passing on a bit of reporting from a friend and admirer of Jim Garrison that I heard tonight. My friend is acquainted with a man, whose name I will not include here, who told my friend that his mother in New Orleans had been a housekeeper to Clay Shaw. This lady is reported as terrified about the hazard to her from what she knows. This includes knowing of Ferry's association with Shaw, knowledge of the sadistic stuff, whips, etc., in the closet, and the mysterious death or killing of somebody in the house, whether an associate or not is not known. There's been no police investigation, but a coroner had come and picked up the body. 2 men lived in the house of which the lady was housekeeper. My friend is not sure of all the details, but this is the general picture he got. My friend is a businessman whose motives are sound. He saw no reason to discount this report, but cannot vouch for it beyond what he told me. I was particularly pleased to read of Garrison's evidence that Lee Oswald had informed the FBI of the assassination plot. I have had increasingly strong conviction that this must have taken place from my reading of Oswald's character. I do doubt that it was Lee Oswald that was Ruby's bedmate. It sounds to me more like Leon Oswald, who was an assassin. With best wishes for your work, sincerely, Griscom Morgan. And then at the bottom there's a handwritten note. It says, note, long shot, but strong if it comes through, and Morgan should be contacted so that the lead can be followed up. P.S. The writer of this letter took the trouble to get Penn Jones to pass it on to us to make sure we'd get it. Doesn't seem like a crackpot letter. So there was the allegation that Ruby was sleeping with Oswald. I think that's complete bullshit. And if anybody was sleeping with anybody, it was Ruby and Kerry Thornley. Was Kerry Thornley gay? No, but he was obvious he was willing to do what he was willing to do, if you'll remember from his confession letter. He said he'd be willing to sleep with a man and willing to kill somebody, both of which he had proven, right? All right. So here we have a statement of Jules Rico Kimball. And I think I understand why this is in the Arcacha file, but I'll get to that. It's reference David Ferry, Clay Shaw, Shaw in the Canada file, Jack Helms, Walter Sheridan, and Townley, Cubans. October 10th, 67, statement of Jules Rico Kimball. White male, 24. Yeah, we read this when we did the episode on Kimball. Residing at 4839 Babylon Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. This statement, I met David Ferry in early 1960 in a bar room named the Golden Lantern in the French Quarter. I would see Dave from time to time in the same bar, and I flew with him in his airplane on several occasions. One night while drinking in the Golden Lantern, Dave introduced me to Clay Shaw. I was with Clay, Shaw, and Dave for several hours that night, which was in late 60 or early 61. From that time, I used to see Clay Shaw on different occasions, drinking and so forth. One day in late 61 or early 62, I received a phone call from Dave, and he asked me if I wanted to go take an overnight plane trip with him. I said, all right, and then met Ferry at the airport, at which time I found out that Clay Shaw was coming with us. At this time, I also found out that we were going to Canada to pick someone up. No other explanation was given. While on the trip, Clay Shaw sat in the back of the plane reading books and slept. Shaw also had a brown briefcase with him. On the flight, we stopped at different places to gas up and stretch our legs. We stopped in Nashville, Tennessee, Louisville, Kentucky, Toronto, Canada. Our final stop was in Montreal, Canada. Ferry and myself stayed in a hotel overnight. I believe it might have been a Hilton Air or something like that. The hotel was located in Doverall, which was right outside of Montreal. Clay Shaw disappeared after we landed, and I did not see him again until the next morning, which was about 8 o'clock, when we were ready to leave and come back to New Orleans. When Shaw arrived at the plane, he had this Mexican or Cuban with him. This guy was kind of heavy set, dark complexion, balding in the front, and was in his early 30s or middle 30s. He sat in the back of the airplane with Shaw and spoke only to Shaw in broken English. The airplane that we used was a Cessna 172, which I believed belonged to a friend of Ferry's. We bought our gas with a Gulf credit card, which Ferry had. When we got back to the lakefront airport, I got into my automobile, and Ferry and Shaw and the other guy got into another automobile and left. About a month or two later, I got another phone call from Ferry asking me if I wanted to make the return trip with him to Canada, but I told him no. I've seen Shaw on different occasions in barrooms and at the International Trade Mart up until the time the district attorney's office started their investigation. I have heard other people introduce Clay Shaw as Clay Bertrand, but he's never been introduced to me as Clay Bertrand. All right, let me pause right here. So obviously the man they picked up in Montreal was Sergio Arcacha. That's why this is in the Arcacha file. This will definitely connect to the flight manifest. About a month or two later, I got another phone call from Ferry asking me if I wanted to make another return trip with him to Canada, but I told him no. I have seen Shaw on different occasions, blah, blah, blah. I already got to that. He said, I would also like to state that about 2 or 3 weeks after David Ferry died, I got a phone call from Jack Helms, who was formerly with the federal government and later connected with Ku Klux Klan, asking me if I would take a ride with him by Ferry's house to pick up some papers. I said yes, and a short while later he picked me up at my house in a 66 white Chevrolet. We drove to Ferry's house and parked a little way down the block. Jack got out of the automobile with a flashlight, and it appeared that he went around the back of the house or into the backyard. A short while later, he came back with a black briefcase and got into the automobile, at which time we drove off. Later, I believe that the contents of this briefcase were put into a safety deposit box in the Bank of Louisiana. Later, I believe that these papers were removed from the Bank of Louisiana and put into a big black box in St. Bernard Parish, which belonged to the Klan. The fellow who kept this box is called Otto. I do not know him by any other name. I believe that these papers were then removed from this black box, but I don't know where they were removed to. I did manage to get some papers from this black box, but they pertained to the Klan, and I returned these papers to Clement Hood, an FBI agent I was working for. I also had contact with CIA agents, their names being Steinmeier, who had since been transferred to Texas, and Nat Brown, who was still in New Orleans, and another guy by the name of Red, last name unknown. I used to have meetings with the agents in different motel rooms where I would give them reports, pictures, recordings, etc., and would also receive my paycheck or cash, which I would sign a voucher for, and would also receive further instructions. They would mail different things to me at my post office box number, which is 701-30252 Lafayette Street Branch. Several months ago, Rick Townley with WDSU called me and told me that they had information that I had tape recordings that someone wanted to buy from me. I asked him how he found out, and that I had them, and he said that didn't matter. He asked me if I would meet him someplace, and I told him yes, to come over to my house. He said no, he wouldn't do that. I think it would have been someplace public, so I met him at the Copper Kitchen on Tulane Avenue. After we talked for a while, I went home and put on a suit, and we went down to WDSU. When we got to WDSU, Townley called Walter Sheridan in New York, and I sat there while Townley talked to Sheridan. After Townley hung up, he said that Sheridan would be in town the following morning. Townley asked me what I wanted for the tapes that I had, and I told him $500. The next morning, he gave me $500 for the tapes and asked me if I would do a film for WDSU consisting of what I knew about the Cubans, Ferry, Shaw, etc. The tape that I sold them contained some information about the Klan and other information about the papers that were picked up at Ferry's house. Walter Sheridan's the one who gave me the $500 for the tapes. This $500 was in a sealed envelope, and it was all in $100 bills. This was given to me in an office in WDSU, which was located by their newsroom. We then went upstairs, and they locked the doors and placed a guard on the door and started asking questions and taking pictures of me. I even remember that there was a man from Sweden who was talking to the cameraman, and they asked him to leave. They asked me questions such as, do I know Clay Shaw? Did I ever fly with Clay Shaw and David Ferry? If I ever knew Gene Davis, which I told them that I knew Gene Davis very well because he was a personal friend of mine. If I knew Gordon Novell. If I ever worked for the FBI, CIA, to which I said yes. Of which questions Walter Sheridan said he had already known that I would say yes to. I was then told to say that I didn't know anything that would help Garrison in this investigation, and this was also put on film. I don't remember everything that he told me to say, but he didn't tell me to go to Canada. Oh, but he did tell me to go to Canada. He also said that he would edit and cut the films after I was gone. He also said that they would get me an attorney if I needed one. I told Sheridan and Townley not to release this film if they were going to cut any part of it. They said that when I get to Canada, they would call me and ask if it could be released. They called my wife later and asked her if she would let them release it, and she also told them no. I understand that this film has been cut and released. Mr. Hood told me not to get involved with the district attorney's office, and if the district attorney's office tried to subpoena me, that he would take care of it. Mr. Hood also told me to give all the cooperation necessary that Walter Sheridan required. Sheridan and Townley also told me not to talk with the district attorney's office and to call them right away so they could get an attorney for me. This is about all I can remember at this time. Yeah, this is all CIA stuff, right? Walter Sheridan, obviously CIA, working for WDSU, owned by the Stern family. I always found it was interesting that Rick Townley was a very similar name to Rick Thornley, which was the alias that Kerry Thornley gave to Ronald Schwinghammer out in Natsugi, right? Strange, right? Made me think for a while that there was no Rick Townley at WDSU, and I can still be convinced that way. But unfortunately, I've seen pictures of him and stuff, so I guess there was. All right, Shaw's flight to Canada with Ferry. Reference Shaw and Ferry Canada Associations. Shaw as Bertrand in 1977 Open Leads file. Shaw's flight to Canada with Ferry, the man whose name we first thought to be White, appeared to be White, W-I-G-H-T, vice president of Freeport Sulphur, who reputedly made the flight. Should be reportedly, shouldn't it? Currently, an effort is being made to locate White, who now lives in New York, by a contact of Mark Lane's. Despite the fact that the original source of this information was Jules Rico Kimball, a man with a record, this lead keeps growing stronger. From the very outset, it had been reported that the flight had something to do with the import of nickel, following the loss of the original import supply from Cuba. Let me ask you a question. Why the fuck does anybody need nickel? What is the nickel for? Well, I don't care what the cover story is, but ultimately this nickel is going to end up in fucking Dimona, isn't it? Duh. Remember, everything in this time period is about Dimona. Recent information developed on White in a separate memo indicates that he is now on the board of directors of Freeport Nickel Company, a subsidiary of Freeport Sulphur. The separate file on this is rather detailed report from Plaquemine Parish and should be included in the new Shaw file. All right, taxicab driver went out of his way one night to drive by Ferry's house and told passenger he had taken Shaw to that address on many occasions. I have more details on this, that I can skip. The Bertrand's library card, that I can skip, that's irrelevant. There's something here that I'm specifically looking for. Yep, we're going to skip over the library card stuff. And okay, here we go. We're back to the flights to Montreal. October 9th, 68 to Jim Garrison from Andrew Scambria. Reference Clay Shaw. During my recent interview with Mr. James J. Plain of Houston, Texas, Mr. Plain informed me he'd been contacted by Mr. White of Freeport Sulphur in regards to a possible assassination plan for Fidel Castro. Mr. Plain said Mr. White was only one of many oil import people he had the occasion to talk to from New Orleans. Mr. Plain also informed me that He thought the picture of Clay Shaw was very familiar and that he may have met him in Houston, either at his apartment or at the Normandy Club, at the places oil people frequent. Okay, we already read this. I hate when they duplicate files. All right, this is what I've been waiting for. This is the important thing that Garrison was hinting at all along. All right. It says, here's the flight plan. Check light-colored station wagon bought in Houston, Texas in February or March. Was a 1959 model of 1963. Check this wagon at Walker's on April 10th of 63. There's no connection there, even though he thinks there might be. And at Garland, Texas Airport and on railroad parking lot behind Book Depository. See Holland's testimony to commission on this wagon. Yeah, that's wrong. He just got that wrong, so we can ignore that. All right. This has reference Shaw, Ferry, Oswald, and Thornley. Okay. And then when you get down here, what we're looking at is the FAA flight log on the trip to Montreal. Okay, and the passengers are Heidel, Lambert, and Diaz. Okay. Heidel, Lambert, Diaz. Who could this possibly be? I think it's pretty obvious. This is a flight log not referencing the same flight that Jules Rico Kimball took, but another flight that was seemingly based out of New Orleans, but went to Hammond, Louisiana, and then Garland, Texas. But the reason that this is all relevant is because it's the same people making these runs, right? Diaz, obviously, Sergio Arcacha. Lambert, obviously, Clay Shaw. And Heidel, in this case, obviously, Kerry Thornley. Kerry fucking Thornley. And it says here, why is the number of the plane blanked out? And it says, review Lee Harvey Oswald time schedule for April 8th. Yeah, Lee Harvey Oswald was not there. It was Kerry Thornley. Memorandum, November 7th, 1967. To Jim Garrison from Tom Bethel. Reference an unidentified men. The unidentified men at 544 Camp Street. All right. So this to me is where it really starts to get interesting in regards to the identities of the Oswald who was seen there. I don't think Oswald ever stepped foot at 544 Camp Street. There's no evidence that he ever did. All the evidence that indicates that he was hanging out with these people can be easily explained once you realize it was Kerry Thornley, not Oswald, hanging out with these fucking people. Says here, reference Cubans, reference Bannister, reference Carlos Quiroga. Carlos Quiroga, in the scheme of things, turns out to be a nobody. Note, apparently, according to FBI statement, apparently Newman rented 544 Camp Street to Cubans on 2 occasions in October of 61 and February of 62. For an unspecified period beginning March and April of 1960. March or April of 63. Okay, so we rented to them October 61 through 62, and then again through March or April of 63. But then he contradicts this in statements to the Secret Service when he says 544 was not rented to Cubans until September of 62. Kind of irrelevant. He probably just doesn't remember. Who knows? Summary of interviews with Sam Newman. Sam Newman was the landlord at 544 Camp Street. How long is this interview? Not long. It's only 2 pages. We'll go through this and then we'll wrap it for the day. Summary of interviews from November 23rd, November 25th, 27th, December 2nd, and that's all of 1963, and then 1/18/67 of George Eckert. So Newman's initial interview on 11/23/63 resulted from the discovery that some of Oswald's literature bore the address 544 Camp Street stamped on it. That turns out not to be true, though, right? Turns out not to be true. So how else did they know about Bannister if not through that literature? And the ones that did, I think, there were some of those flyers found at Guy Bannister's office. Newman related he had rented office space to Cuban revolutionaries over a period of 3 or 4 months, but that he had evicted them because they got behind on rent. After he had evicted these revolutionaries, he discovered that an unknown subject, a white male, 22 to 24, 5'9.5", 185 pounds, fair complexion, light brown hair, spoke with a Spanish accent, had moved into the space in the building vacated by the Cubans without notifying him. Newman only saw him once, had no idea as to what his name might be. Newman gives no indication of the date of this encounter, either month or year. Sounds like fucking Kerry Thornley to me, but you never know. According to the same Secret Service report, CE3119, one James Arthas, apparently harmless protective research subject of file CC232791 at 544 Camp Street, who stated that an unknown man had attempted to rent an office at 544 Camp Street, but that he discouraged him. 2, in his interview with the FBI, Newman advised he rented the office space to Cubans approximately 8 or 9 months ago, i.e. March or April of 63. He added that he did not recollect seeing Oswald in or around the building, nor had he rented any office space to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee or anyone by the name of Oswald. Someone called him in September 63, however, wanting to rent office space, but Newman did not see this individual as he put him in touch with the aforementioned James Arthas, the janitor. Newman added that 9 or 10 months ago, January or February 1963, a tall, thin man about age 38 with dark hair did contact him and paid 1 month's rent for an office which he was going to use to teach Spanish. This is presumably not the same man Newman had mentioned 2 days earlier to the Secret Service, whom Newman does not mention in this interview. 3, when interviewed by the New Orleans Police Department on November 27, 63, Newman said he had rented office space to the Cuban Revolutionary Society about 15 months ago, about August of 62, which group was run by young Monteleone of the Monteleone Hotel. Guy Bannister was, according to Newman, well acquainted with this organization. Newman then adds similar story to his initial versions of to the Secret Service, recounting the intrusion of a man who evidently had a key to the office. He described as a white male, blonde hair, red complexion. 4, in his second interview with the Secret Service on 12/2/63, Newman specifies that he rented office space to the Cuban Revolutionary Council from October 61 through February of 62. In April of 63, he was paid $100 by Carlos Grimader, accountant for the CRC, in partial payment of the rent. When the CRC departed, they left a lot of literature in the office, which he turned over to the Salvation Army or some such organization. About 2 weeks after the Cubans moved, Mr. Newman relates, the young man with the Spanish accent appeared. This would have been in or about March of 62. This is the time when Oswald was in Russia. Yes, but not Kerry Thornley. Newman adds in this interview that Jack Martin introduced both Sergio Arcacha and Carlos Quiroga to him, and that Quiroga appeared to have a shortwave radio transmitter. He also said at this time that no office space in 544 Camp Street has been rented since September 62, but again mentions the incident, which he had earlier told the FBI, but not the Secret Service, of the man who paid a month in advance to teach Spanish. This was 4 or 5 months ago, in June or July of 63. George Eckert's interview pertains to the subject of Guy Bannister's files and does not reveal any new information about the people who rented from Newman, except to say that Newman cannot remember the names of the people who were his tenants in 63. How much you want to bet Newman's CIA? Or ex-OSS or something along those lines. Disposition, in my view, Newman should be interviewed again and asked more specifically about the 2 still unidentified males who attempted to rent from him. James Arthas should be interviewed with regard to a 3rd unidentified man who visited 544 Camp Street in September of 63, whom Newman did not see. Interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. But I think we can draw a couple things from this. Sergio Arcacha, through the Cuban Revolutionary Council, did rent space here from October 61 to February of 62. That would be separate from Guy Bannister's operation that was going on there. And also we can say that Oswald never rented space there, right? So people say that Oswald had space there or rented space there. No, he didn't. He never did. And I would bet you my firstborn that he never knew Guy Bannister or any of that stuff. And that was always Kerry Thornley. All right, so we're going to call it here for today. We're going to pick up here. Tomorrow's Sunday, and tomorrow's my last day of moving, maybe Monday. I might take tomorrow and Monday off and get back here on Tuesday. Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. So we'll be back here on Tuesday following up on Sergio Arcacha and the Jim Garrison papers. All right, thanks, everybody.